The Journeyman Chapter 4. The road taken by Jared and Mr. Toppin led not only through the country, but through the years as they painted their way from one state to another and from one season to the next, leaving their traces along the countryside. Instead of carrying rolls of wallpaper, as some itinerants did, they would stop at a house and unroll their paint kit and bundles of stencils. Some people would want to have one room done, some every room in the house. Some would have nothing at all to do with the journeyman painter and his apprentice, but these were lessening with the years. The gales of war blew across the Atlantic in 1812 as men once again took up their muskets to fight the British. The brief but bloody war soon gave way to peace, and in its wake, progress and prosperity spread across the land. Roads were opened and waterways established. Water power was harnessed and factories sprang up. Frontiers expanded until there seemed no limit to what the young nation might achieve. As the arduous toil of clearing the wilderness and subduing the land diminished, refinements were possible and art became a partner with life. The ornamentation of homes through color and design was now considered as essential as the protection of homes against enemy intrusion had been earlier. The frivolous things of life, which were gracious too, were no longer confined to the city or to a wealthy few, for peddlers and journeymen of every description were carrying them through the countryside. Books and trinkets and tinware, gadgets and trifles, even delicacies for the table, as well as all manner of Yankee notions, were being distributed far and wide. The itinerants might stay anywhere from a few hours to a few days, or even for a few weeks, as in the case of workmen like Mr. Toppin and Jared. The journeyman was a social figure, with words a part of his commerce, and he was always welcome. News of life in the towns, of fashions in society, was relished by women in the country, and men listened eagerly to the tales of those who had journeyed west, tales of rich land without stones, of smooth rivers without boulders. After hearing them, many an adventuresome youth, tired of the struggle with stubborn New England soil, would pack his few belongings in a saddlebag and, taking his gun and horse, start west. Any itinerant workman in those days was prepared to do all kinds of work. Mr. Toppin would often tell a prospective employer that he would be glad to paint anything from the walls of a house inside or out to some trifling decoration, and he often did small jobs such as clock faces and mirror panels. So much money was his charge if the work was acceptable, and their board. But there were times when, with winter coming on or a spell of bad weather threatening, they were glad enough just to work for board. Sometimes they would strike a profitable section. Western Massachusetts proved to be such, and they would work from one house to the next, well received and well paid, till there wasn't a house in the whole countryside but had its decorated room. There were other times when they went like nomads, from one county to the next, before anyone wanted their work. Rumors of new houses being built or of old houses being improved would send them seeking to ply their trade where many hands were working. All during the years of itinerating, they were never alone, for tides of workmen of all trades traveled with them, peddlers of every kind of ware, carpenters with their tools, shoemakers with their kits, preachers with their Bibles, doctors on rounds that covered whole counties, judges on their circuits. These were the men who, though none of them knew it, were knitting the whole country together, linking one town together, and through trade and commerce, securing the unity of a nation. Mr. Toppin and Jared, like all the other journeymen, went through the fair days of summer, as well as the wind and rain of autumn, and the hail and snow and biting cold of winter, and the mud of spring. They went through the green valleys, over passes in the mountains, and in a land where bridges were few, forded the rivers. It was one thing to lie out at night in the summertime with the stars warm overhead, head pillowed on saddlebags, and no covering but the soft air blanketing the earth. It was another to lie out on a stormy night, wet, weary, and hungry, falling short of an objective and having to seek shelter along the roadside, holding the horse by the bridle lest the noise of the storm frighten him to flee in the dark. The day's objective was generally an inn, and there were plenty spread along the roadways. An inn was a warm and friendly place, alive with good food and good talk, a place where men could swap ideas and even possessions, for it was the spirit of the day to share everything alike. Apples were there in wooden bowls, and popcorn, and plenty to drink during the storytelling. Often, far more than talk echoed around the spacious earth. Entertainers traversed the countryside too, and put up at the inns men with puppet shows or fiddles, men with hand organs and carved wooden figures on the top that danced to music, actors seeking jobs and able to recite long pages of Shakespeare to enraptured audiences, and ventriloquists sitting quietly in corners who could make the chicken in the pot crow as if it were sunrise, or the pig roasting on the spit say all manner of complaining things. The bristles on Mr. Toppin's brushes wore down and had to be replaced. The packets of dry color were used up and had to be renewed again and again. Jared grew tall and ceased to be a boy looking into the world of men, but a man in his own right. His pale face put on no color except when summer bronzed him, and his body still remained lean. But he was strong and sinewy, and his eyes looked out on his fellows with something new in their dreamy gaze. For he was now used to measuring himself up to a job. He knew how warm a thing praise could be, and even in the bitterest of winter, he who had always felt cold who had felt the cold so, found that appreciation wrapped him like a cloak. He had almost forgotten, what fear was. Rarely now did that convulsive shivering he had known since he was a child rack him. The stripling thrill he had felt at being an apprentice had given way to the confident strength of being a master workman. 5 years and more had passed, and during that time he had lost count of the rooms they had done throughout Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and even at one short period in New York State. In their designs they had used the pineapple motif often, for it was the desire of the day to show hospitality. The willow was another favorite, exquisite and drooping, emblematic of immortality. Sunbursts were often asked for, and bells that rang for joy or liberty. Sometimes a simple rose medallion with finely indented leaves lay on a wall divided into panels by a graceful entwining vine was all that a room contained. But if the walls were raspberry red and the designs grass green, they had a way of quickening the whole house. A frieze, repeated often, was that of the holly encircling a pine and a candle. And always in a house where more than one room was done, a frieze of swags and bells with pendant tassels would be stenciled somewhere. Leaves were familiar motifs, and flowers, tulips that had the nodding grace of springtime, roses with the fullness of summer. They were New England craftsmen and could use only those designs adaptable to their tools and to the houses of which they would be a part. Though many of the ideas may have originated in other lands, they had now become one with the rolling fields and rocky coasts and tree-clad mountains of their own land. Roses and tulips, blue cornflowers and spicy pinks bloomed in New England gardens, and the lush, long branches of willows bent over New England brooks. These were patterns that could be carried into houses and laid upon walls as freely as a woman could pick flowers in her garden and arrange them in a bowl to grace her table. Once a traveling scholar they met at an inn asked to see Mr. Toppin's stencils. Thumbing through them, he held up the carnation spray and started in a long-winded way to identify it with ancient symbolism. You have been influenced by the Orient, I can see, he said. Tell me now, where did you study, and what is your source for these designs? Jared, for the first time in his life, saw a look of absolute bewilderment on Mr. Toppin's face. Well, they just come natural to me, the journeyman painter said finally. From where, I cannot say. Strange, very strange, the scholar murmured. Mayhap the beauty that runs through the ages is the same stream, Mr. Toppin went on, gazing into the fire, just as every flower that unfolds its petals reflects the bloom of creation. The scholar murmured to himself as he turned the stencils. Mr. Toppin was silent, with a smile upon his face, and Jared thought of the bubbling spring he had seen long ago coming up out of the earth. Jared liked best the houses they did for brides, houses being built by husbands-to-be, with brawn and love driving every nail. The small red hearts would be delicately or boldly brought into the designs, perhaps hidden in the frieze, or perhaps displayed clearly on the panel over the fireplace. Jared, at work on a pattern of hearts, hummed to himself on his ladder, with his stencil firm and his brush strokes swift. He thought of Jeanette, then, and of what 5 years would have done for her. Lovely she must be by now, perhaps as tall as her mother, but with her hair still loose on her shoulders and her feet still bare. Mr. Toppin surveyed the room into which a bride would soon be brought. There was color and life in it, and something more to deck that first night under the roof where all nights thereafter would be spent. It's a pretty greeting for a wedded lass, isn't it, Mr. Toppin? Jared commented. He smiled to himself, thinking of the day he would do a room just so, and then lead Jeanette into it. Her room, his wife, forever and a day. Boy, it's not a greeting. It's a symbol of all that these 4 walls shall embrace. Mr. Toppin turned to Jared, but someone new was standing in the room. Someone unfamiliar save for the brushes in his hand. Jared's head was high. A smile lived in his face. It was as if the beauty he had brought to drab gray walls for 5 years past had given strength and vitality to his thin bones and pale skin. I can't call you boy any more, Jared, Mr. Toppin said slowly. You've grown a man. Jared was cleaning his stencil, and Mr. Toppin was bending over the kit, packing it for their journey. Marriage must be a fine thing, Mr. Toppin. Why did you never take a wife? I did, Jared, and for nearly a year we had a home and some land. I was a farmer, with no thought then of a stencil and kit, but death was quicker than life. He stopped. His voice was quiet, neither heavy nor sad. He was relating a fact, not probing a wound. My father found another wife after my mother died, Jared said. Mr. Toppin nodded. Some men can, Jared, and the world must bless them for being sensible. But some men love once and never again, for they still love that one. You're that kind, Jared. You'll love but once, and when you do, God grant that she love you. Jared stood motionless in the room that was filling up with twilight, the little red hearts still showing bright on the walls. A cold wind swept around him and he shivered. Putting down his brushes, he took his coat from a peg and pulled it on. But he had learned long ago that no coat could warm him when that wind blew. There was one more job to do before the winter set in for certain. As they rode through the golden richness of October, Mr. Toppin told Jared of it. We've a free hand here, Jared. The order is for a decorated room with plenty of design and color. Squire Talent is away, and but for a servant or two, we'll have the place to ourselves. So, he raised his arm and threw a sweeping gesture around the autumn world. Here's our pattern. Shall we do it? And what's more, let's satisfy the squire's feeling for heraldry. Squire Talent was one of the old Tories who had learned to guard their words after the Revolution. Do you remember what a Tory is? No. It was one of the people who was, what's the word? Their allegiance was to Britain, to England, when the Revolutionary War was happening. they were not for separating from England. So this one stayed, this man. So he's not really a true American with his allegiance. But he still kept his coat of arms over the fireplace in the great room of his house. It was the parlor he wanted decorated, a good-sized, 6-windowed room, and as Mr. Toppin explained, the squire did not care what the design was so long as it was something he could understand. His memory reached back to the brightly wallpapered rooms in England. His desire was to see a room in his own house reminiscent of them. That night, after supper had been served to the journeyman and his apprentice, Mr. Toppin told Jared the story of heraldic symbolism, how a coat of arms might be won by a noble family for being valiant or in the royal favor, and how their descendants had the right to use it perpetually. Jared listened in fascination. Mr. Toppin's mind was like a storehouse full of unexpected knowledge, for he seemed to have some learning about everything. Jared had commented on it more than once, and Mr. Toppin had laughed. "When you have sat around as many hearths as I have," he said in explanation, "you'll have as much information, but it's only oddments." Bricky. Mr. Toppin, however, was not to work on those walls. The next day, when they were spacing the frieze with cord and chalk, the ladder he was standing on slipped, and he fell heavily to the floor. Jared hurried to help him to his feet, but, unlike the other falls that happened occasionally, he could not be assisted. "It's my back, Jared," feeling as if it were being twisted the wrong way round. Jared sought one of the servants, and between them they carried Mr. Toppin to his bed, a bed they thought he would leave in a few hours, but which he did not leave for a month. During the days, while Jared waited for Mr. Toppin to resume the work, he made some preliminary preparations, but after a week, Mr. Toppin urged his apprentice to do the work himself. "'Twill take longer than if we were both at it, but you know enough to go ahead until I can join you." "Mr. Toppin, we haven't made any designs yet. Jared," the big man said with difficulty, "you can stand still in that room until those 4 walls talk to you. Think of what means most to Squire Talent. Do that, and speak the things that you have heard through the work. Now leave me, lad. I'm not at ease, and like the dumb creatures, I can bear a touch of suffering better if I bear it alone." Jared's heart felt heavy when he left the room. All the years he had worked as Mr. Toppin's apprentice, he had relied on him. Now he was brought up sharp with the realization that he must bear the work himself, carry out its conception and its doing just as he would when on his own. Jared went back slowly to the great bare 6-windowed room with its high fireplace and finely curved mantel. It was late in the afternoon, and the autumn light was pale around him. Too late to begin work, but not too early to begin planning. He stood quietly as Mr. Toppin had told him to do, trying to find somewhere that idea which would serve Squire Talent best. The squire was as good a patriot as any man, but he still revered his family's coat of arms, clinging to that memorial of other days when glory came of royal patronage and not of a man's 2 hands hewing out his life from the wilderness. "Look to nature for your patterns," Mr. Toppin had said many times. Jared left the house and went across the meadow and up a lane that led into the woods. The low-lying sun had tipped the world and every growing thing with gold. Heraldic streamers of red and gold, sable and green, waved in splendor from oak, maple, beech, and darkling pine. He breathed deeply and lifted his head high to meet the keen rush of air. Down the golden archway of the year, the wind came charging, under the tattered banners of the trees that hung out against the sky like nightly standards flying from gray cathedral walls. This was the glory hour of the trees when, before their leaves fell, they celebrated the passage of the year. Jared saw with sudden realization that the branches reaching crosswise from stalwart trunks revealed the structure of each tree as a cross. The standards of the knights of old had proclaimed the cross, but those were emblems of a single journey to a distant land, while the cross on which each tree was built was a symbol of faith that knew no quailing, no matter how long its crusading. The wind struck swiftly, swinging the bright banners to and fro, clutching at bits, sending tatters of the maple's gold and the oak's crimson, the beech's copper into the air, reaching vainly for the pine's dark strength. The trees quivered and were silent as the wind raged around them. They stood with dark trunks rooted in the earth and crossed boughs held uplifted to the heavens. As Jared gazed at the boughs, now almost bare, he saw on every twig tight buds outlined against the sunset gold, the crimson secret of the oak, the enscaled cradle of the maple, the little sheathed sword of the beech. Faith, my friend, the pine seemed to whisper, faith has the last word always. The wind crept low, swirling the leaves in a gold shower, then was gone. Jared stood still with the evening coolness coming out of the woods, washing about him. There was no sound anywhere. He brushed his hand before his eyes. An idea, like a cobweb, had tangled itself in his thoughts, but there were fine strands to which, if he would follow, could lead him rightly. He walked back to the house across the dark fields, guided by the amber glow of candlelight shining from the window. Cobweb strands were flimsy things, he thought. He needed far more than cobwebs to secure his idea. He worked late that night, cutting his stencils, a whetstone beside him so that his knife might never lose its sharpness. Through the days that followed, he worked long and earnestly. Mr. Toppin knew better than to ask him any questions. Needless they would have been when Jared's eyes shone with all that he was seeing. It was harder work than he had ever done, for he was doing it alone, and firm as his fingers were in the mornings, in the late afternoons he often had to stop long before the light waned because of the numbness in them. He would not risk a single wavering line in this room of his. He remembered seeing a decorated room at one of the inns, a room in which he could tell by the steadiness of the pattern which work had been done in the morning and which in the latter part of the day. Jared was resolved that no such signature should proclaim his work. When he had done all that he could for the day, he would clean his brushes and stencils, shut the door of the room, and go to the woods. There, he was rarely alone. Overhead, the indrawn whistle of the harmless, broad-tailed hawk could be heard as it floated idly across the sky, or a flutter of wings and a cheerful prattle would bring a chickadee to hand, alighting on a nearby bush. A squirrel scolded in the branches above, that quick flow of energetic sound that was no more than a torrent of small talk to ease a flighty conscience. The underbrush stirred, and a deer darted across the path, but with the swiftness of custom, not of fear. Jared brought to the woods only a longing to learn of the hidden secrets of beauty, and the creatures knew it. A man who used a brush was not one to wield a gun. I've seen squirrels seeking nuts all my life, Jared said one evening, as he sat with Mr. Toppin, but never have I seen them in such haste to store them. They know best, and that's the first sign of many to prepare for a hard winter. The brown mare has a coat on her like that of a bear, Jared said with a laugh, and as for the gray, I think just being astride her will keep me warm. Mr. Toppin smiled. That's good. You'll find plenty of cold in the north. Are we going north this winter? You are, Jared. Your time is more than over with me, and you'd do better to start itinerating in the winter than in the spring. I have a way of thinking. Jared stared into the fire. It was reasonable to find a place where he would have board and lodging for his work during the winter. But it was hard to face the parting, even though he had always known it was to be. I'd like to work with you a while longer, Mr. Toppin, he said. I'd like to have you, but it isn't fair. I can't teach you anymore, and it's time for me to take on another apprentice. Next summer, you'll be taking one on. I? Jared exclaimed, amazed at such a thought. Why, of course, Jared. Else, how should our trade grow unless we teach others? Jared was silent for a long time. Then he said slowly, Where should I start to find work? Back north, Mr. Toppin replied with no hesitation. New Hampshire has had little enough of the stencilers compared to Massachusetts and Connecticut. You'll find an open field there, and one where you'll make your own name with pride. You've been Toppin's boy long enough. It's time for you to be yourself. Jared Austin, the journeyman stenciler. During the next few days, Jared finished his work with the mingled feelings, real sorrow that his apprenticeship with Mr. Toppin was over, and that any future meeting they might have would be by happenstance. Excitement that he was about to try himself, command his own ideas, set his own prices. Aside from the work, there was the knowledge that in going back to his own land, he would see, perhaps not till next summer, but soon all the same, Jeanette and Mother Thaxter, Nancy Austin and the girls, and the baby who must be a fair-sized boy by now. Because he was a free man in his own right and could no longer be cowed by fear, Jared knew that he could face his father. He even dared to picture his father forgetting all the anguish he had brought to the world. Kira. Eben Austin, then, would look upon his own son with respect instead of hatred. Jared would go north, when Mr. Toppin had said, but he would not go over the mountains into his homeland until spring or summer. Not until he had decorated many rooms and could be called a master in his own right, an apprentice no longer. The day approached when his work on Squire Talent's walls was done, and he could bring Mr. Toppin into the room to see it for himself. Mr. Toppin had left his bed now and was hearty enough. Mr. Toppin said nothing when he saw Jared's walls. Just as years ago, Cinnamon John had said nothing. He stood still and let the walls embrace him, telling their story. There, on the walls, washed a grayish hue, were the leaves found in the woods, painted bronze, ochre, and Venetian red. They made a frieze so buoyant and alive that the wind seemed to be skipping through them. There was a pine tree balanced truly, dark green and strong, a motif repeated throughout the room. There was a leafless branch encradling buds. The design was simple and serene, and gaiety bordered the whole in the dancing frieze of leaves. Mr. Toppin turned to Jared. His eyes were glazed with tears. You have sealed your apprenticeship with great promise, was all he said, but Jared knew what it meant. There were a few brief happy days before Jared went north. Squire Talent returned and was so pleased with the room that he not only paid Mr. Toppin well in silver dollars, but gave him 3 more rooms to do, which would keep him busy all through the winter. Now Jared was impatient to start on his own, and every day kept from it seemed wasted. Mr. Toppin paid him what he had agreed upon, and Squire Talent added a gift of 5 silver dollars, which would help Jared buy his stenciling kit, paints, brushes, knife, dry powders, and stiff paper. Squire Talent had a parting gift for Jared, a bag of corn which he pressed into the lad's reluctant hands. "'Tis the finest Indian corn ever raised," he said, "and worth its weight in gold to a farmer." "But, sir, I'm no farmer," Jared protested. "You've got to be something of a farmer to survive," Squire Talent went on. "Take it, boy. You may find use for it all the same." Jared took the bag as if it were a curiosity. Squire Talent smiled. "Agriculture lives on seed rather than harvests, and you've got enough in that bag to feed a county if you use it well." The early November morning was sunny and warm when Jared threw his saddle over the gray one's back and stowed the bag of seed away in his saddlebag. A long handshake with Mr. Toppin ended 5.5 years of apprenticeship. "Goodbye," he said, then pointed the gray one's head toward the north and waved his hat in a final farewell. Mr. Toppin, with Squire Talent standing beside him, watched Jared go. What lay ahead of the lad no man could guess, but Mr. Toppin felt that he had equipped him with a trade that linked heart and hand, and with such he could find his own place in the world. "God be with you," he called out. Jared pressed the gray one forward. The road was long before them, and though the sun was warm, there were heavy clouds edging the sky. The wind snapped a cold lash out of the north. "We've a hard winter before us," Squire Talent was saying, as the two men turned and went toward the house.